All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're so glad you're with us. I'm going to close out this slide so you know you're all in the right session. Um, and we're so glad to have you with us. We wish we could see your faces. I think everybody is a little bit tired of Zoom, but we're glad that we could gather at least this way. We always call it gathering around the digital campfire for a conversation about some important issues. And my name is Ann Wicks. I'm the Ann Kimball Johnson Director of the Education Reform Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute in Dallas, Texas, which is a mouthful. But I'm really delighted to be able to talk about one of our projects today and bring it to life. Quite frankly, it's a data project, which sometimes can be not always the most exciting thing to discuss. And I'm glad that we're going to be able to bring it to life with two governors. It's designed for state leaders who are going to talk about some of the hard decisions they made, how they prioritized education and workforce issues. And then we're going to talk about Mississippi in particular. We did a short case study as part of our tool to talk about how one state has made progress, and Dr. Dean and Dr. Smith will give us a sense of how they actually navigated this at the state level. So we'll get a chance to talk with all four of these folks. Because we've done a lot of these Zoom sessions, we've just decided that slides are boring, which I think sometimes they are in person too. So we're not going to show slides. We're going to show faces. But I also know sometimes it can be helpful to have a reference material. So we've posted a link in the chat, or it's coming very soon. My colleague Justine is monitoring the chat for us. And you can download a brief deck. It's about 10 slides, but if it's useful to you or you want to click through and look at it, it's there for you. It's a public link, so feel free. It'll be a PDF. And then feel free to use the chat for questions to us. We'll be tracking it, and questions to each other as we go. So I hope you all got a chance to listen to those opening sessions this morning. I got to jump in on a little bit of it. It's President Bush and Secretary Margaret Spellings were first, and then Secretary John King with Elisa Villanueva Beard, the CEO of Teach for America. I've heard them all a number of times in different settings over a number of years, and I'm never sorry I listen in, put it that way. So if you missed it, I'd go back and look at the recording. It was thought-provoking, inspiring. They talked about the challenges in general around education in a normal year and what it means now in a COVID year, the challenges of accountability, assessment, equity, how we think about serving kids for opportunity, exactly what we'll be talking about in our session today. And President Bush giving a shout out to our colleagues from Mississippi for the work they've done. So we're always glad for that. So before we get in, let me introduce our panelists to you. They all have long bios with all their accomplishments online. So I won't read you the long bios, but I'm going to give you some high points to know what's important. And I'm going to start with the Honorable Susana Martinez, who is a former governor of New Mexico. She was the 31st governor, in fact, and the first female governor, and then the first Hispanic female governor in the country. And then prior to that, she spent about 25 years as a prosecutor along the southern border in the U.S., which always, whenever I see that, it reminds me that someday having an off-the-record conversation over a drink of choice seems like a good idea with you, because I feel like there's lots of stories about your career as a prosecutor. Yep. In her time in New Mexico, she focused a lot on the safety for children and families and educational opportunities. She worked with her former education chief, Hannah Scandera, on a number of reforms that improved outcomes for kids. And so we're so grateful that you're with us, Governor Martinez.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And then next, the Honorable Bev Perdue, the former governor of North Carolina. She was the 73rd governor of North Carolina, and she was also the first female governor in her state. And importantly, she started her career as a teacher, a public school teacher, before elected to a state office and spent a number of years in the state legislature in North Carolina before being elected lieutenant governor and then governor, and has continued to work on education in many ways. She's part of the governing board for NAEP. She's involved in a variety of initiatives and organizations around education and continues to be passionate about the role that education plays. So welcome, Governor.
Thank you.
And then, as I mentioned, our two Mississippi experts and leaders who are with us. First, Dr. Tanette Smith, who Tanette is the Executive Director of the Office of Elementary Education and Reading in the Mississippi State Department of Education. She is, of course, a former teacher, campus administrator, curriculum coordinator, I believe, literacy expert, all the things that you get to become a real expert, and then took that expertise to the State Department of Education and had played an integral role in the work that Mississippi's done around literacy and how it's supported and engaged teachers and campuses, among others. So we're glad that she's with us. And then bringing up not the rear, the end of the list, sorry. That sounded, you never tell anybody they're bringing up the rear. Dr. Jason Dean is with us. He is the chair of the Mississippi State Board of Education. So he gets to be involved in lots of the politics, lots of the relationships, lots of the resourcing, how Mississippi keeps making sure this can happen with this focus on achievement, student success in both literacy and math that you've seen in Mississippi. His real job is in aerospace. So he has a prop if you want to show it, so people know what you do. I don't know where you put it. There you go. Got to have a toy in your office. And he worked as vice president of Mississippi's Economic Council. He was an education policy advisor to Governor Haley Barbour. He's a White House fellow. So he's been around, knows the politics side of this, and has a real commitment to kids and opportunity and equity. So welcome to our panel. If we're in person, this is where we all applaud. Glad to have you. All right, I'm going to give a little quick overview on this tool and what we created, and then we're going to dive into the conversation. So today we're talking about two big questions. These were the two questions we had at the Bush Institute when we started working on this. Number one, are your state's young people on track for what we call prosperous, self-determined lives? And question number two, how do you know? How do you know? So we built a tool, perhaps somewhat naively, like you need to be on the front end of a big project, to try to understand how do state leaders measure that? How do governors, the people they work with, how do you measure whether or not kids are on track for opportunity and agency and choice in their futures? So we believe that the purpose of public education, if we loosely call that pre-K through 20, right, is the investments that we make in that public education system is to exit young people when they leave that system, whether if it's after high school, a certificate, 2 or 4 year degree, they are prepared for what comes next. We need all these young people to be supporting themselves and the family, have some choices in what they do, be able to engage in their communities in the way that we think are important. In our tool, we used voter turnout, volunteerism as sort of proxies for that community engagement. All the things that we need to make healthy, strong states, healthy, strong communities. So we started thinking about the gateway data that you would often see that we talk about in education. It could be 3rd grade reading, could be 8th grade math scores, high school graduation rates, completion rates, all those things that will come up when you're talking about ed policy and the data we rely on. And we started just thinking about that 3rd grader, when we talk about 3rd grade reading, is usually about 9, right? So in 15 years, that 9-year-old is 24. So if you're off, when we talk about when a child gets behind on their 3rd grade reading, that usually means there's going to be a 24-year-old that we've exited our system, whether deliberately or they've left the system, and they're not ready for what's next. We've denied them that agency, we've denied them opportunity and agency in their futures. So how can we use these gateway data to better understand what's happening for kids, where we're losing kids, which groups of kids using disaggregated data are getting what they need? And we use that as John King was talking this morning, he was talking about why we care about assessments and accountability, and he was talking about values. He referenced 3 things, right? Information, first value is information for parents and kids and teachers. The second is how we use data to develop a surge of resources to go where it's needed, right? The kids who are farthest behind, the groups of kids who aren't getting what they want, that data should help inform that strategy. The third value he referenced, which now I've forgotten. What was his third value? Oh, disaggregated data, right? The role of disaggregated data, that helps us if we value understanding which kids are getting what they need and which kids aren't, data, that sort of measurement is a way to help us understand that, right? So if we believe those things are important, then high quality assessment, the right ones, high quality, not ad nauseum assessment, but the right assessments help us answer those three values. So we wanted to talk about what that data looks like. So we went out and grabbed state level comparable data across that young adult outcomes back down into early childhood. And we only looked at outcomes. We didn't look at inputs. We wanted it to be comparable at the state level, and put it all in a tool together. So if you look, for those of you who are following along on a slide deck, I won't show it because there's too many words, but slide 8 in that deck shows you all the measures that we use. So we're looking at things on the young adult side, like what are people doing? Are they in school, working, in the military, or sort of idle? Are they, if they're working, are they at or above a median wage in their state? Who's where on their wage earning? What's their educational attainment look like? And I mentioned voter and volunteerism. And then we move back down into secondary and elementary to look at some of the classic measures: graduation rates in high school, ACT and SAT scores, AP passing rates where they're earning college credits, and then down into the 8th grade measures on NAEP and state assessments, 3rd grade measures, NAEP and state assessments. And then early childhood, we really struggled. So if somebody has a great idea about this, I hope they throw it in the chat for us. It's hard to come up with a comparable output measure on early childhood. There's lots of questions we had around demand for high quality early childhood care and education that it's really hard to answer at a comparable state level. So what we ended up using was, does a state have a kinder readiness assessment? Are they using a kinder readiness assessment to try to figure out where kids are when they're entering that public system that we talked about? So if you go onto pipeline.bushcenter.org, we'll put that in the chat so you can see it. You'll see each state's data. There's a comparison tool in there. You can build your own comparisons between measures, states, subgroups, so you can see it all. We've added in what we call bright spots. These are short case studies of some states that are showing improvement in how they've aligned policy and investments between those buckets: young adult, post-secondary, secondary, elementary, and early childhood. They've made deliberate connections and alignments and are seeing improvements in student outcomes, student success outcomes. And then in January, we're adding what we call a measure of state longitudinal data systems. That will glaze people over at a cocktail party. And the reason we included it, we fearlessly forged ahead, because all this is as good as the data you've got, right? And states, and you all know on this panel that you can be awash in data and have no data, right? Like, where does it live? What's in there? Who can access it? So our measure doesn't talk about what inputs you have in that. We're measuring the governance of those systems, the clarity of purpose, accessibility, transparency, working with our friends and colleagues at the Data Quality Campaign, DQC, who many of you all know and have worked with, to help try to understand what's happening in these state longitudinal data systems. Because if we think this gateway data matters, then how we collect it and house it and use it also matters. So that's what we've built in this tool. And our goal is to help governors and state leaders better align those policy and practice interventions to improve equity of opportunity for young people, right? When they exit this system, have we prepared them for agency and opportunity for what's in front of them? And of course, a COVID pandemic year makes this all the more important. We know we had gaps. We know those are gaps for Black, Hispanic, Latino, English language learner students, students in poverty. We know those are exactly the students who've been disproportionately impacted by what's happened over the last 10 months or so. And so we're trying to get at what data is out there that can help us help state leaders, governors and state leaders make some decisions, some really hard, important decisions coming ahead. We're thrilled to announce that just this week, we've established a partnership with Strata Education Network, who's going to help us on this dashboard. We'll use this dashboard to help inform their state strategy as they think about some workforce opportunities going forward. So, charge to everybody listening in, go check out the tool, and listen in to our our experts as they talk about leading and the role of data and the challenge of some of these hard questions. We'll start with our governors on this to talk about when you're sitting in the hot seat, the buck stopping with you, to talk a little bit about your focus in your leadership. President Bush mentioned this morning that sometimes he thinks about education is to states what national defense can be to the federal government, right? Sort of about as important as it gets. And I'm wondering if, but Governor Perdue, will start to you. Why did you engage so much with education when you were as governor, and what was important to you to achieve?
Well, I engaged because it's what governors do, as President Bush said. If there wasn't a focused engagement by the chief executive of the state, then education can go the way of the numbers of people in the legislature or in the governing body. I used to say there's a flavor of the day, and that flavor of the day happened to be with whomever had the power. And so I think it's essential that the governor take the lead in every state in America. And that lead should be informed through the data from the children of the system, and also from previous data and future data. I believe that people in North Carolina, Texas, Mexico, wherever, have to be willing to admit that resources make a difference and that you must look to the future. You can't see a box and think that the same box that I had 100 years ago with a chalkboard and a teacher and 30 little desks is the way to do education in the 21st century. So I think educational leaders, teachers, should be given the freedom to do personalized learning and to be a little bit individualistic and not driven so much by the administration. But I do believe that data should inform the teachers' behavior and their content. And if you do all that, at the end of the day, the citizenry is well served. The resources, the focus, the accountability, the data, all of that equals a prepared workforce, a graduate, a post-secondary graduate who can gainfully be employed in the economy of every state in America. That is essential to the outcome of this country as we compete in a global economy.
Governor Martinez, your take on why education was such a priority for you and what you were hoping to achieve during your leadership?
Well, certainly, I think my experience as a prosecutor for 25 years influenced my outlook on education, because so many of the adults and juveniles that became part of the criminal justice system struggle to read. They have been pushed along a school system to the point of absolute frustration and dropout, or maybe graduated with absolutely no reading skills, could be applied to a job and be successful in a job. A large percentage of those individuals that I worked with and dealt with and tried to figure out, how do I improve this system in order to keep them from coming back and back and returning to the criminal justice system. And so I got involved with the educational system back when I was a prosecutor. I started a little school in my office of kids who could have gone through the system, but I instead gave them a chance and said, okay, we're going to work on you attending school, moving you up to with a grade level that you should be at. We're going to have teachers that can do that variety of grade level teaching in the office. And then we're going to make sure that before you're placed back into school, you're in a good place. And then we're going to follow you for a good 2 years so that we keep you out of the criminal justice system, but hopefully back on the right track of learning. And as a governor, of course, that experience followed me straight into that. And it was always beat into my head that you learn to read from kindergarten to the 3rd grade. And then from the 4th grade on, you're reading to learn for the rest of your life. And if you don't have that honed in skill of being able to read, then you start to fall back and fall back and fall back. And so social promotion, which, we don't want to make kids feel bad. We don't want families to think that the kiddos aren't doing so great. We're doing an injustice to them when we just move them along with their own age group. Others are succeeding and they're not. And at the end of the day, they're going to have a job with minimal skills, inability to read anything of any slight complication. And I wanted it to be the mantra of, we, number one, when I walked in as governor, we were 49th in the nation in education. Mm. And I will never again say, thanks to Mississippi. Yeah. Because now Mississippi is doing wonderful things. But we were 49th and now we're 50th. And it becomes because we implemented some great policies that you were going to learn to read. We're not going to keep moving you along without giving you the tools to get better at it, helping the teachers help the students. We were in this together. And so at the end of the day, we had a graduation rate from 63% to 74%. But it had to mean something. It couldn't just be we're graduating more kids that can't read or can't learn. And so that was super important to us. And every single year that I was governor, we raised the bar on how tough it was going to be. We weren't going to have this mediocrity of students and just sort of, move along, check mark, you graduated, and there's our data.
What you both talked about reading, and obviously our friends from Mississippi will talk specifically about that, but what other data points did you use or wish you could use besides tracking reading? What did you pay attention to?
Well, attendance. You have to be there to learn. So attendance was big, not just for students, but also for the teachers. Mm-hmm. Because when you have substitute teachers, we've all had substitute teachers. And what happened? Chaos. A lot of times they're on track with the teacher in the classroom. And so the more chaotic we could become, the less that was going to be learned through a substitute teacher, especially long term. Mm-hmm. Certainly was also the ability for those students to have we provided what they call K3 plus. So it's 20 extra days for every classroom. If you're just not quite ready to get into the next grade, but you needed 20 more school days, we paid for that through the state government and allowed to catch up. We measured that to see, is it useful or is an entire summer school session more useful? And we did see many kids catching up because then we were able to have the little spots they started to fall off. We did some of that assessing during the school year because wait 9 months and then go, oh, you know what? You don't know how to do long fractions or whatever the new math is these days. Catch them early so that there's a tutoring system available for them to go to after school to be able to then get caught up quicker and not behind, but for maybe a week and we've caught on to what's happening. So some of those assessments were big for us and were big negotiations with the teachers and rewarding. We rewarded our good school. We rewarded our struggling schools who were willing to put in the time and effort to become the great schools. And the teachers, we wanted to reward them financially as well. Now, we didn't measure proficiency versus non-proficiency, although that was a part of it. We measured actually, are you improving? Mm-hmm. Are you improving? Because you're not going to go in the 4th grade from a 2nd grade reading or a 2nd grade reader to a ready to go 4th grade reader without some time. And some teachers were able to do it and some kiddos were able to do it, but not all of them. So we measured success, measured improvement as well. That helped us kiddos.
And we believed in looking at the whole student as well, the whole child, and looked at the situation. If you could see what had happened with an older brother or sister, or sibling, what's the condition of the home? Is the daddy or mama or grandmama in jail? Who controls all of that? Who is the child? By whom does the child hold himself or herself accountable? All of those things, pre-K, did the kid have access to good early childhood education? Those kind of determinants really are qualifiers for whether the kid will be able to read in 3rd grade. If I start 1st grade and have had no social interaction, no one to teach me the rules of civil engagement or the behaviors of civil engagement, then I likely am going to fall behind socially my first year and never have time to focus on my reading and math. I agree with the whole panel that if you can't read, I can walk into any fifth grade class in America and tell you the kids that I believe, I bet, will not end up graduating high school or going on to post-secondary career training. That's why I'm so excited about the emphasis on data and the emphasis on a long-term alternative between college and traditional post-high school education and all of the new things we talk about called credentialing. It's really a great opportunity to change the stereotype of education and workforce and the linkages to early childhood.
We think it's really exciting what people are starting to develop and do, and I think is being accelerated in some ways in response to COVID because everything is transforming. One of the pieces of data we were looking for and hope to include in the tool now, but we're hoping downstream we can, was credentialing, understanding some sort of comparable number on credentials issued, and not just our friends at Excel and Ed have done a great job on this, not just a credential, because a credential isn't a credential isn't a credential, right? Like what's a wage earning credential? Something that's going to actually, it's going to get you on a pathway to a job that's wage earning. I think I'd heard from a local community college leader that one of their most popular programs was in floral arranging. I love fresh flowers. I love having them in my house, but I also know it's not always a real lucrative pathway for if you've got lots and lots of people with a floral arranging certificate. Chances are they're going to struggle.
Who licenses the people who are given the credential? How do you prove that if I put down $3,500 for a credential, that training I'm receiving is worth the money? Who validates the programs and the initiatives to give people a choice other than traditional public school and post-secondary? Big questions. I think it's really exciting to be part of the education discourse during these days of the 21st century.
Yes, it seems like a real pivot around value, sort of the emphasis being on value to the student, like what, as opposed to just, this is good for you. It's like castor oil or whatever you got to take. This is good for you. Don't ask questions, just swallow the darn thing, right? Like this idea of understanding that families and kids, students have to understand the value. I think we'll see that transformation in higher ed. It's been talked about in a number of ways.
I do too.
Okay, so for our governors, our analysis when we started building these state bright spots uncovered 6, we call them key ingredients, and these sound obvious when I'm going to say them out loud to you, but I think you all know that they're not always present when a policy plus funding meets implementation. So these were the 6 ingredients that we have: a leadership with a vision. Like there's a state vision about what we're doing and why. A clear policy agenda aligned to that vision. Supports once the policy is in place, right? Alignment across some, coexisting policy efforts. Stakeholder engagement, which is really interesting, and sustained commitment that oftentimes needs to bridge administrations, which is really where it gets interesting. And I think in Mississippi, several of those are in place right now. In all of our case studies, we talk about Florida, the work and they've done around reading, which I know has been influential in Mississippi as well. We talk about higher ed in Oregon, California, and Virginia, in addition to Mississippi. But as you think about the decisions you were making, the policies you were supporting, how did you build a coalition for support? How did you think about sort of the carrots and the sticks that you used to help create kind of all the elements that you need to give a policy a fighting chance once it's in place?
Do you want to go first? I'll go first. I have to give you the political landscape first. Yeah. I'm a Republican elected in a state where Republicans are outnumbered 3-1. And my legislature, the Senate and the House, have been Democrat for more than 60 years, except for a 2-year period while I was a governor. And so there has to be across the aisle conversations, negotiations, discussions. And I've always said over and over again, these kiddos are not Republicans and they're not Democrats. So can we get off our podiums and stop talking about sounds right? If at the end of the day, we're going to end up winning because we'll have kids who are smarter and better and ready and prepared for the workforce. When I was running for office, the very first thing I talked about was growing our economy because we rely a lot on the military, on funding from the military and oil and gas and funding from that. And I said, those are up and down funding sources. And state in New Mexico, in our state, our funding comes from state government, not from the local taxes. It comes from state government. So taxing goes to the state, and then it equally is supposed to go out to the states or to the different school districts and different schools with equal formulas, so that there isn't a really wealthy neighborhood that is getting less or more, either way. And so what I was wanting to do was make sure that we quit the politics. And when I met with this one man, he says, what are you going to do if you bring X, Y, and Z business like you're intending to? Where's the workforce for that? And I said, let's be ninth in the nation. And so we had to think outside the box because we need to move quickly. I had 4 years first, and then hopefully another 4 years. And here comes another administration. So that sustainability is there. I was happy to hand over the baton and say, run with it, call it your own. I don't care. At the end, our kids are the ones that are going to win. And so it takes courage. It takes a thick skin for you to take the jabs that come with, you know, the unions, whether it's, you know, I understand the unions. I understand why they're there. They're there for the adults. They're not there for the kids. They're there for the adults and their work environment, salaries, compensation, all the things that they get, you know, as adults. That's what a union is for. But negotiating with them sometimes was not as easy, and neither was the legislature because they were beholden to the unions. And I was never afraid to say that. I had the courage to be able to say, you want to keep staying at 49th after 60 years of control? That's fine. But the ones that are losing are the kids. And if you can't put those two things together, that we're not passing policies and laws that benefit our kids. And so what I used was my platform to bring out the data, tell people, and parents especially, this is what your kid is not learning. This is what your kid is doing in the next grade. These are how many kids drop out. These are how many kids don't even have access to AP, even though they're smart kids. They don't have access to a community college. The information that was never being given was powerful to that coalition that you need to build with teachers who acknowledge, yes, we can do better, with parents who say, I had no clue, and I get it. I mean, everybody's busy with their lives, but important to them. A coalition with enough of the Democrats to swing over to the Republican policy or law or bill that we're trying to pass and saying, we're going to grade our schools. You know, we grade our football teams in the sense of who gets a championship for this or that, or who came out second in state in football. And, you know, we do all those things. But we needed to do it in our schools and say, right now, for example, we have terms that are used like spotlight. What does a parent think when you hear your school is graded as spotlight? Is that a good one, a bad one? Yeah. And shine the light? I mean, I'm not sure what that means. If you get a school grade that your kid comes home and says our school is graded a D, you go, oh, wait a minute. I need to go talk to somebody. There's something not quite right, and what can we do to improve? It's not shaming. It is not to point the finger. It is to say, what can we do? We have money and resources for X, Y, and Z to change that trajectory. And so that coalition has to include parents, information that is logically understood, and that they could translate it into action. And the same thing for the legislature. I didn't have a problem in saying, legislator so-and-so, you have voted down grades A through F in our schools. You have turned down funding for K3 plus. Our kids can have an extra 20 days, those that are struggling. You have voted against YZ. When it just came to negotiations, it died. Always try the first. Always. At the end, you go, I got to fight for the kiddos.
Yeah. Governor Perdue, how do you think about this, or how did you think about this?
I still think about it with the work I'm doing post politics. I think the biggest thing that we can do in the country, in every state, is to be very transparent with our data. If you could drill down to the data and tell a parent or a grandparent that my kid who is in third grade is reading on first grade level, that matters. I think all of this grandiose talk about educational plans and outcomes and future thinking and ownership of the platform. I mean, the platform is never going to be owned by anybody who doesn't have the power to own it. And so all of this wishing for things is unimportant. What's important is the way the kids are being taught and learning in school. And so if I'm transparent with the data and talk in words that real people can understand, my kid can't read, my kid can't count, and I'm willing as a leader to provide the additional resources, as Susanna did with the 20 extra days, to help the kid catch up, to help the kid be motivated, whatever it takes, then the kid can be a high flyer. Every kid is born in this country with an equal chance, unless they're special, with an equal chance of being somebody. We, the adults in the room, are the people who do that child damage. We stereotype a child when they come into class. We look at the kid and think, oh, they're not from a good family, blah, blah, blah. Those kids have to fight all these invisible barriers. So that why don't we, the people in charge who have access to the data, use that data to inform decision making by individual families and especially by the business community. If we could convince the business leaders of America that education does count and that there's support in mentoring and guiding and investing in poor schools and in low income children and of children of any income who are slow learners, then I think the world could change. There is an opportunity here to allow pathways that look a bit different. And I think what I did, what we did in North Carolina, the 2+2 career college, is critically important, that you convince a kid by 8th or 9th grade, you can get out of all this rigmarole. You can get out of this by finishing out the content you need to graduate high school while you're also gaining a career track. You can be a computer assistant. You can be a truck driver. Yeah. All of that makes a difference, Anne. So I do think it's strong leadership who don't get caught up in the rhetoric from the education philosophers and just get down in the ditch and do the hard work.
There's a lot of philosophizing, as my dad would say.
I agree.
This is great, and I think this is a good moment to pivot to our friends in Mississippi. Governors, we're going to come back to you, so hang tight on this. But Dr. Dean and Dr. Smith, I think that down in the ditch is what you all have done. Like, how do we take this idea?
I'm so confident.
No, I love it. No, because it's real, right? Like that's what's really happening. So how do we take it from, this idea about equity for kids and that all kids have the opportunity to learn and succeed to what you all have done now in Mississippi, where we've really seen a change in outcomes. So I had a chance to speak with Judge Gray Tolleson, who for a long time chaired your state's ed committee in the legislature. And he described it this way, which I sort of loved, because I was like, what made things different this time around? Like, why in 2013 did you get something different? And he had said, well, the department and others, Dr. Smith, no offense, just, kept coming with like, here's the shiny object that will solve the problems. This is the shiny object. We like this. This is going to be great. If you fund this, help us with this, this is going to make a difference. And he said, we'd pass it or we'd debate it or whatever. And then we'd all go home from the legislature and nothing would really change for kids.
Right.
And he said, so this time in 2013, when you passed the Senate Bill 2347, I think, is what kicked it off, right? Your Literacy-Based Promotion Act. That lots of elements came together, including a pretty broad stakeholder engagement and a real focus on implementation, how that bill went from being a bill to real change in practice. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that. What made this different? Why did this one start working?
Well, first, Ann, I have to say this, that I came on board in 2013 as well. So
See,
when Tollison was
Mhm.
passing this bill, they went out and they said, well, we want 75 literacy coaches and we want to put them out in schools. And the MDE really held to their standards, high standards. And they had over 500 applicants at the time in 2013. And out of those 500 applicants, 24 were hired, including myself and the other director. So only 22 literacy coaches out of 500, because they wanted to be sure that we had the right people in the right spot, right? So they were looking at not only finding the people, but who should we, who do we assign these people to? So we had to figure out who needed the most help. And so we pulled all of the data points that we could find, and we used those third grade reading data points to determine where we would assign our literacy coaches. And so, 2013, 24, by the end of 2014, we were still actively recruiting, and we used something that was a little innovative, I think. We used the educator in residence model. Because districts didn't want to let their best teachers go. So we said, hey, let us borrow your teachers, right? We will train them up. We will give them the best training that they could possibly receive. And when they finish, they may want to come back to you, but we hope they don't. We hope they'll stay and help impact the rest of the state. And we were able to recruit from 2013. We went from 24 to 2018 to about 81 highly qualified literacy coaches or literacy staff in place and supporting 78 school districts in over 180 schools. So it was threefold. So we organized the intensive support around, what did we need? We needed literacy coaches. We needed people in place. We needed high quality professional learning, right? We used the lessons learned in Florida. Florida's told us, hey, we did the literacy coaching thing, but we let our schools select their own literacy coaches. And we said, oh, okay, how'd that work out for you? Not very well. Not very well. So we knew that we needed to maintain control so that we could guide their work, right?
Yeah.
We could make sure that they were impacting the right students. They weren't just pulling students at random. We were using data to guide our support to those schools. And I think the other big thing that was different with this is that we had a focus on improving educator knowledge, as well as making sure that everybody understood what we were trying to do. So it was a communication plan, as well as professional learning, and then the identifying and organizing of our resources.
That's great. One of the things I'm struck by, and for those of you who don't know, sorry, we sort of jumped into this. And if you go on pipeline.bushcenter.org and look at the bright spots, you can see the data behind this. Mississippi has made dramatic improvements for students in reading and math in 3rd and 8th grade. That's translated to a lot of other success. This is particularly true for Black students in Mississippi, but and Hispanic students are succeeding because of this intense focus on improvement in literacy. We talk a lot about capacity in our work. We have a big research project around school leaders, and I'm impressed with how you all problem solved around. I mean, you got to dance with who brung you, right? It's not like you could swap out an educator workforce in Mississippi. Right. But that also doesn't mean you didn't have very talented people working in the system, and it was just a matter of actually finding them and realigning a little bit of your how you how you had them focused, which I think is really interesting. Dr. Dean, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what made this different politically when you think about the role of the Ed Board to keep the focus, keep things aligned, not let a new shiny object distract anybody from the work that was underway.
We love chasing shiny objects in education. It's always the next big thing that, gets us going. But first of all, let me just say thanks again for inviting Mississippi to be represented. I was born here. I grew up here. I'm very familiar with our history. And for the last couple of years, it's just been awesome to get some positive attention. But it's because of people like Tanette Smith and the work that they're doing on the front lines of education. So we're tickled to be here. We keep it coming. We love it. But to answer the question, that year, I was Governor Haley Barbour's education advisor, and I guess 04 to 06, that time frame. So 6 or 7 years after that, I'd seen a few, reform ideas go through. And what I really, recognized that made this just a little bit different this time. Of course, we had, educator buy-in to some degree. That took a lot of work. I think Governor Perdue said it exactly. The governor was leading on it, Governor Phil Bryant at the time. He had the bully pulpit. He was talking about it. Governor Bush, Jeb Bush, had come and talked to our legislators. But what really made the difference in my mind was when we engaged the business community. When we sort of started talking about, this idea of, the importance, we talked about, the importance of reading for decades, but now we started talking about it in longer terms, like return on investment. You can't start dealing with your high school graduation rate in 11th grade. You got to start, in the 3rd grade. And I think once the CEOs of our, large businesses, our state chamber of commerce engaged in the issue, it really got to that tipping point where there's, with any legislature, there's a bunch of noise. There's always issues. So this is just one more issue. But now that the business community engaged, it wasn't coming from what I call the usual suspects. The usual suspects are educators and to some degree politicians. But once you have sort of the folks who typically don't engage start saying, hey, this is important. I think to me that was really kind of the thing that pushed this over the edge. And, to your earlier point, I mean, then it required like sticking to it. All right, we did it. There was a lot of concern, but hey, stick to your guns. And as a result, the data has borne out that, we're starting to see, in big significant gains in NAEP, for example. And so we're telling the legislators and telling the business community it's worth the investment. And, so we can bring them along on the next big issue.
Dr. Smith, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you engaged parents and teachers in this, because it was intentional and I think distinctive, and how you did it. You talked about educator knowledge. We find that I get frustrated by that so often, how little we give educators sometimes the right knowledge around practice and policy and how you define assessment. What are the different kinds of assessment? Why does it matter? And arm them as professionals like they are, right? Sort of this, so it's not as much craft as it is like, this is a science. This is very, we treat them like professionals. Right. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you help teachers get on board with the work you all are doing, because it required saying, guess what, the way we're doing it now in many cases isn't right, which nobody likes to hear.
Right. Well, we did a massive proactive communication blitz. We needed teachers to understand that teaching reading is rocket science, right? It is a science behind teaching reading. I am a old 1st grade teacher, old kindergarten teacher, and if I knew half the things that I know now, I look at some, back at some of the kindergartners that I taught, and I say, oh my gosh, I hope they're doing well. Well, they are. Many of them are physicians and attorneys. However, I know there are some that I could have reached if I'd known what I know now. And so we teachers needed to understand that teaching reading was a science behind it. Yeah. And then we needed parents to understand what parent does not want their 3rd grader to not know how to read. If you go in and you ask a parent, hey, we can pass your kid on in 3rd grade, they don't have to read. Who's going to say, yes, pass my kid? No one, hopefully. No one will say that. And So we need to make sure that we were speaking with one voice. We had a consistent message that we told to parents, we talked to community leaders, because we had a lot of pushback from not only the parents who were anxious, more anxious than the kids, quite frankly, but community leaders too. Big community organizations were saying, hey, you are setting up our poor Black children to fail. And my question to them was, are you telling me because they're poor and they're Black, they can't learn to read by the time they exit third grade? And usually that pushed them back. No, that's not what we're saying. But historically, if we give our teachers what they need, it's not about a program. Programming does not solve the issue. It's about supporting teachers' content knowledge, their understanding, providing them job embedded professional learning that they can go back and put into practice inside of a classroom, right? And then giving parents tools that they can use to support their kids when they get home, and then giving administrators tools that they could use to talk to their parents, and then giving community leaders things that they could use to bring the school together and build a community support system. And we're all talking the same language. We don't want Mississippi to be last. No longer will they be saying Mississippi is last in the nation. And we built steadily upon those first baby steps of developing that proactive communication blitz and moving it beyond.
Yeah. That's great. Dr. Dean, I know you all are thinking about in the Ed Board the impact of COVID and what that means for kids in Mississippi, and how it'll intersect with this work and the momentum you all have built. Do you want to say anything about kind of what you all are tracking, what you're trying to measure, what data you're looking at, what you're thinking about?
Absolutely. That's so one thing Tanette says really important. I just want to reflect on that. The parents, it was most eye-opening that the parents were most afraid. But you know what? Every year, we've increased the standard, increased the rigor, increased the grade that it takes to pass the reading gate. And guess what? Our percentages of passers have gone up as expectations have gone up. So when the adults started raising expectations, the kids were like, let's do it. They were right there. So great point. But to COVID, yes, obviously, this has been a heck of a year for everybody. As chairman of the State Board of Education, it's my other part-time job is, trying to, figure out how can we, use this disruption to create some innovation. We won't get into the Mississippi Connects program, but I will say last Friday, we just delivered 325,000 computers to every student in the state of Mississippi. So we are a one-to-one state. That's how our political leadership chose to use some of their CARES Act money. It's $200 million. It's a big chunk of change for our state. Yeah. So really proud of that. But specifically to the third grade reading gate, in our law, of course, this is for every version of this, you got to pass the test or you don't move on. So your promotion's out. We're very concerned about that because we understand, this is a different year. So in fact, just this morning, we were meeting with our governor, Tate Reeves, the state superintendent and I to talk about this, to say, listen, on the one hand, we want to, be faithful and keep the intent of the law, focused on, ensuring we don't just pass kids along. But on the other hand, let's, not be unreasonable and think about, well, not every kid has had the same opportunity, right out the gate. I mean, we'll get there. And we're open-minded about, well, what can we do to ensure, first of all, we're still doing the test. Their assessment is not a question. This is about decoupling assessment from accountability. The question is, what happens if they can't pass? We give them multiple opportunities. And to his credit and to the state superintendent's credit and the department is, let's get creative. Let's acknowledge that, there might be students that move them to fourth grade, but we're going to focus on them and keep testing them and give them the resources that they need to move along. So some practical thoughts that we have around the law as it relates to COVID, but it's not so draconian that we're just like, the law's the law. We're not paying attention to, what the realities are. And so it's just very heartening to see that political leadership as well as education leadership, acknowledges that. But at the same time, we want to ensure that we give them the resources that they need to refocus if, they need the extra help in fourth grade.
Right. Yeah, I think that's such a critical question. It's a very practical view of this assessment accountability dilemma I think that people are having is how do whatever accountability decisions make support kids directly, right? Like no kid is inadvertently impacted in a negative way in it because accountability it hasn't quite matched with the situation. I think that's a really hard, sticky question that states are grappling with. We are just about done with our time. So I wanted to end us on kind of an optimistic high note if we can. You all have significant leadership roles. You have led through difficult times. Dr. Dean and Dr. Smith, you are in the midst of one of those crucibles right now. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what's giving you some hope right now. What does that look like? What's giving you some hope? So Governor Perdue, I'll start with you.
The ability to, the belief that it's going to be over and that we'll be better than we were before, and that our kids now are buying into that kind of belief. I think it's all about mindset, and schools will go back the way they were in some form or fashion to an institutional model. But this opportunity we've had to innovate, the opportunity to bring digital into the classrooms in a profound and powerful way, the fact that you all are one-on-one in Mississippi makes all the difference in the world. I don't believe that pre-K through post-secondary, much more prolonged than post-secondary, will ever be the same. I think you're going to see great things happen in education as we end the COVID holdup and go back to living our lives, because our lives won't be the same. I'm really hopeful and excited to see what happens in America's education system.
Great. Dr. Dean, you're up, then we'll do Governor Martinez, and Dr. Smith, you'll have the last word.
I'll be brief, but that's such a great question. I've said from almost the beginning, the education system in Mississippi reminded me a lot of what the coast looked like after Hurricane Katrina. We went down there, I was working for Governor Barber, and we said, listen, let's not worry about AYP. Let's not worry, No Child Left Behind. Let's just take a year off. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, this is the last thing that you need to tell us. We need to stomp on the gas. We've got such great momentum. And that's really the sense and the spirit that I get from our educators in Mississippi right now. Nobody's saying, hey, let's just take a break. We're recognizing what the challenges are, but that spirit of, listen, we've got momentum, and let's not, let off the gas right now. Let's in fact, go harder since we've got new assets and resources. That's what gives me great hope.
Great. Governor Martinez?
And I have to agree, Dr. Dean, in the sense of this is not a time to continue to lose a generation, because we can very much lose a generation by not saying, there went that bad year of 2020 and may creep into 2021, some maybe halfway, and go, well, this is where we're drawing the line in the sand. It's like, no, these kiddos so many of them are starving to get back into, the communication with teachers and other students. And we have some really bright kids that aren't being challenged at all. And then we have kiddos that have sort of gone off the grid that we've got to find. We've got to look for them now, not when we're all getting back into the classroom. We got to find them now and get them re-engaged. And so what gives me hope is certainly, what did we learn to slow down? What have we learned when we don't have Wi-Fi in every home? New Mexico, we're the 5th largest landmass state in the country, which we had accomplished 9.9% of Wi-Fi in every school before I left. But that certainly did not include every home. And so kiddos would have to go to the parking lot to get with their computers and do their homework. And so hopefully this is to better spend the CARES Act money. And if we do get this next round of CARES Act money, that it is super focused, laser focused on the COVID impact on our kids, our economy, our future workforce, the colleges that are producing our great teachers, great reading coaches, folks that we're needing for our economy. I mean, to open the doors of a business doesn't end the crisis, because there are going to be kiddos who are going to need those jobs. And if they're not prepared for those jobs, then it's a long-term impact. And so I really get upset when I see the CARES Act funding has all these little junket thingies in it. And you just said, this is in the benefit of a child because, and then you put it in to finish the sentence, then it belongs in the CARES Act. If it doesn't, You know what? I think we need to have hope that they will come together now. Congress, stop thinking the kiddos are Democrats or Republicans. They're not. And that they deserve all of our attention so that they can succeed and not end up in a system that I spent so much time in and tried so hard to say, how can I have a court order you to get a job when you can't read a manual and hold down that job? It's not fair.
Yep. Thank you for that. All right, Dr. Smith,
And
what's giving you hope?
It's giving me hope. I'll be brief as possible, but I do have to say that the face of education has changed dramatically, right? No longer do we give kids pencil and paper and the chalkboard and the whiteboard and the markers. Our kids are producing PowerPoints. They're producing Flipgrids. They're producing all of these phenomenal technologically based learning tools themselves, right? So not only did COVID sort of throw us into a tailspin, but it did give us a sense of hope in that it is challenging us to prepare children to be 21st century producers, right? These kids are going to be some of the most tech savvy kids that we have ever produced, I think, as they matriculate through school. So it gives me hope to see that. It gives me hope to know that the little kids who did not have computers 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago in my neighborhood now have a computer and are able to start to do their work. No longer am I trying to go out and gather people's kids, strangers' kids, and say, hey, come to my front yard so that I can teach you, this week. I can see them with their computers, and I am overjoyed that something great and powerful may come out of this tragedy of COVID.
Yeah.
We just have to learn to lead.
We
and
have to
not
learn to lead. Yes. Agreed.
Well, thank you all so much. I feel like we could have extended this conversation for a while. There's a lot here, but I so appreciate the leadership and commitment you all have to our friends in Mississippi. Keep at it. Really admire what you all are doing and know the challenge is steep. Governor Perdue and Governor Martinez, thank you so much for your voice when you were in office and that you have not shied away from continuing to be a part of this important discussion in the years that you've left office. Thanks to everybody who joined us. This is the part where we'd applaud if we were all in some ballroom somewhere in a hotel. But I encourage you all to check out pipeline.bushcenter.org. Let us know what you think and let us know if you have a follow-up question for any of our panelists. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Congratulations, Mississippi.
Thank you.